Yeah. With one of the switches you had at work, you set up a path through the router.
Here, one class.
Like just back and forth inside the router. And then the DNS, the reverse DNS, so the IP address, or custom domains that's spelled out. So when you ping to this address, it would be blah, 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 a long time ago when the galaxy far, far away. And then you had the routes, depending on whether the traffic was going in or coming out, was different, so that it didn't have to do like 45 hops for everything. It was like the back was a lot further.
You know, I'm not sure I approve asymmetric routing.
Well, it's all inside of one box.
How much resolution do you need before it's copyright violation? Maybe if it's a slow run.
No, this would fall under fairies.
Yeah,
It would be fairies.
you can't really consider this an equivalent product, the actual movie.
But this is a fan fiction, right? And
This started like the 90s, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
about the 90s. Tell that blinking lights that in now.
What I'd say is, quote, held up is a relative term.
Well, I guess
There's still quite a few
The sad part is a lot of people have watched this
Yeah.
story and myself
Then you
included,
may have a
and I enjoyed it.
this one.
My favorite in this girl though is text mode.
Man, 140p is still a good
Like, wait.
Oh, God. You guys are okay. Okay, so,
all right,
yeah.
Jason, take it away.
All right, so that was, for those who want to know, it was basically that command there. How many people here still use Telnet? Yeah, it's actually not bad for payload. I mean, places like Mackenzie Financial still do a lot of custom apps internally to control servers with a Telnet payload, but just encrypt it with a VPN or something, right? Or they use it on a protected network. But, of course, my talk is supposed to be the advanced one, and I think it's going to be fairly ubiquitous now because everyone here has probably used SSH and uses it all the time, right? But what I'm hoping to do is today is maybe introduce one or two new things that you may not have learned in the past or knew about in the past. And for those who are new to SSH or newer to SSH and just used it as an encrypted telnet, quite a bit more. So let me just go over here. This is me at the bottom. I didn't draw that, someone else did. SSH Foo, and we all know what that means, right? That's the short form. Unix has used Foo to talk about Kung Fu for 40 years, right? So that's really what it means. And we kind of shortened it to not Kung Fu to just Foo, but that sounds pretty, so they changed it to Foo. So this is just like SSH tricks, things you might not have known about SSH. I got, as you notice, I got the correct epoch for, unfortunately, an hour ago. And just kind of some basic things, because some of the stuff we talk about relates to crypto, and crypto is one of those things that, you kind of don't have to really know that much to use it. In SSH, you really should kind of understand how both symmetric and asymmetric crypto works. So symmetric, of course, is what SSH uses and what almost all technologies use to encrypt the payload of data. So when you see 256-bit encryption, it's always symmetric, not asymmetric. But in order to get the keys, the symmetric keys across the network, that's where asymmetric really, saves the day. So symmetric encryption, really quick, AES is the most common. You just take a bit of unencrypted data, we'll call it plain text. Doesn't matter if it's text or if it's an MP3 or whatnot. You just use a symmetric algorithm. You guys know who invented all symmetric algorithms, right? No? Al Gore. That's why they're called algorithms. Jeez. He'll take credit for it, I'm sure. But anyway, so you just run it through that algorithm, and symmetric means reversible. So you run it through the algorithm. All symmetric algorithms are well known. The steps are very, very well known. You could just take data before and after, figure out the algorithm within hours on some nice computer, right? So they don't hide the steps in AES with Blowfish because you'll find it out really quick. So what you do is you randomize it with a key. And so if you jumble up that plain text with a symmetric algorithm with a random component called the key, then you have your jumbled up ciphertext. And the only person who can reverse those arrows at the very bottom is the person who has the same key. Because once you know that random component that was used to jumble it up, you can't unjumble it up. The problem is if I say, I want to jumble up something and send it to Vadim over there. How do I get the key over, the network? How do I get it so that you guys don't hear it? Do I say, hey, Vadim, the key is loud? No, you guys are going to hear it, right? It's the internet. So, it's fast for encrypting data, but we typically have to combine at the very beginning of a session asymmetric cryptography to make that key go across the network without anyone on the internet knowing. And that asymmetric cryptography is really where some of the SSH foo comes into place as well. So,
You know, Al Gore invented the internet.
who?
Al Gore.
Yeah, he claims he did, but he didn't. He just invented symmetric cryptography. All right, so the asymmetric stuff, this is the stuff where people kind of like their eyes gloss over, but it's something I learned when I worked for Sun Microsystems. I worked for Sun. And the coolest part is I worked 2 hallways down from Whit Diffie. I don't know if you know who he is. Yeah, he's an animal freak. Like him and his wife, second wife, they collect exotic animals. So he's kind of like a idiot savant. You can't talk to him. But if you're willing to talk to him about his animals for half an hour, you have his ear for the rest of the day. So in the 90s, I kind of learned asymmetric cryptography from the creator, asymmetric cryptography, the co-creator, Whit Diffie. Marty Hellman didn't work at Sun, but Whit Diffie did. They just kind of stuck him in an office and said, don't bother anyone. You watch your name. We're good. Talk about animals. So I kind of learned that secret from other people who worked there and kind of learned it. But it's very simple, actually. It's just you have 2 keys. You split the key. So if I want to send, if I want to communicate with Vadim over here, a 256-bit symmetric key that I've generated. The client always generates the key, so that there's no single point of security. The server doesn't generate the keys for all the sessions. The client chooses the key, right, in any communication. So I generate a 256-bit key. Maybe I want to use it for SSH, and I want to get that key over to Vadim, the SSH server, the one running the SSH Demo. So what I'll do is I will download Vadim's public key. I'll say, Vadim, I need your public key. I'm going to send you something. So he generates a public and private key. Anything that the public key jumbles up can only be unjumbled up with the private key. It's one-way cryptography, asymmetric, not reversible. Anything jumbled up with a private key can be unjumbled up with a public key. That's how asymmetric works. So it doesn't matter which half of the key pair that he generated he calls public or private. He just has to generate a key pair sometime in the past, call this one public, give it out to anyone who wants it, call this one private, keep it private, never give it out, and we're good, right? So if I get his public key, I'll take his public key and I'll take that plain text, and the plain text may be that 256-bit symmetric key I want to get to him that I'd like to use. So I'll take that plain text, I'll asymmetrically encrypt it with his public key, jumble it all up, knowing that the only person on the internet who can unjumble it up is the person with the matching private key. That's Vadim. So I send it over the internet. Vadim has the matching private key. No, none of you do, so you can't get it, right? And public and private keys are so strong. They're like 2048 bits usually, not 256 bits. So because they're out there for a while, you can make them hard to crack. Vadim gets that jumbled up cipher text that was jumbled up with his public key, and he can run it through that same asymmetric algorithm with the opposite key to unjumble it up. And what does he see? He sees the symmetric key I wanted to send him. Now he and I have the same symmetric key, and you don't know what it is. Only Vadim and I do. And that's what we use to encrypt our payload with HTTPS or SSH or any other technology. Because if we were encrypting MP3s and lots of data with 2048 bits all day long, our CPUs would be hammered, and it would take a lot longer.
Just an interesting twist on the TLS protocols is that both sides actually generate randomness. So the server doesn't trust the client's random number generator, and neither does the client trust the servers. They both send each other random numbers, and then they both have both numbers, and they use those to generate the sessions.
Which had a loophole that was fixed in TLS 1.2.
Yeah, so it's just a neat trick to get around this trust issue.
Yeah.
Aren't they keep private numbers, prime numbers?
Yeah, so basically these algorithms are, part of the algorithm you might have read is doing mathematical calculations that are the product of 2 large prime numbers, which makes them one-way. One-way cryptography was very, very difficult to invent. If you want to read the story of how it was invented, there's a book called Crypto by Stephen Levy. It's amazing. It reads like an action novel, and it is not fiction whatsoever. It details how Whit Diffie and Marty Hellman had to go into hiding from the NSA, because the NSA would kill any project that tried to beat their cryptography in order to invent asymmetric cryptography in the 70s and 80s. And it reads like an action novel. It's really creepy, actually, because it's all true. Stephen Levy, Crypto.
And I think they got the Association Computer Machinery Turing Award a few years back for the RSA algorithm.
Oh, I didn't know that, yeah. Yeah, okay.
It was the main headline on the Communication of ACM journal.
Oh, yeah, that's actually a very famous journal of ACM.
During an active SSH session, how frequently would you re-exchange key pairs? I mean, is that what's the default configuration?
Once we have a key for an SSH session, you can actually give it a session timeout, which forces it to renegotiate the asymmetric part again. Radius servers typically do that. Like if you're doing 802.1x or something, the Radius server generates the symmetric key that your wireless access point will use for WPA2. And will force the wireless access point and the laptop, which is called a supplicant in 802.1x terminology, to renegotiate that key from scratch every so many, bytes or minutes. But you have to have something, like you have to have a setting to do it. SSH, I'm pretty favorite about it too much. We're never on it for that long. But here's the cool thing, guys. Whatever you encrypt with a public key can be decrypted with a private key. The opposite is true. So if Vadim decides to take his public-private key pair and encrypt something like a message to me with his private key, who can decrypt it? Well, anyone can decrypt it, because if he sends it to any one of us, we can say, hey, Vadim, throw me your public key so I can decrypt this. He gives his public key out to anyone. So he's not protecting the data, but if you get something encrypted by Vadim's private key, and you're able to decrypt it with his public key, you proved it came from him. So that's called digital signature. Right? So what we typically do is we take a checksum of something, right, which is also called a hash, right, one-way cryptography. Take a checksum of an ISO image, you get a number. You can't take that number and get the ISO image back, right? It's one-way calculation, right? It's simple cryptography, one-way cryptography. So you take a hash of something, it could be the hash of a key, right? And you encrypt it. Well, Vadim would encrypt it with his private key and send it to me. If you encrypt something with your private key, a hash of something with your private key, we typically call that a digital signature. And anyone can validate the digital signature with that person's public key and get the hash. Use the hash, compare it against the data that was sent to see that it wasn't modified in transit by a hacker, right? Man-in-the-middle attack or something. So that's how certificates typically work. They're digitally signed public keys. And when you get the public key in the certificate, you get you get that little digital signature. Use the public key of the person, of a trusted third-party CA, to see what that hash is inside. Compare the hash to the public key and the certificate. Oh, they match. It wasn't modified by a hacker. We're good. So it can get quite complex, but the bare bones stuff about asymmetric crypto is right here. You just have to remember that normally, if I want to encrypt something that goes to someone else, I need their public key. I jumble it up with their public key, send it back to them. They're good to go. And that's how we negotiate the SSH keys. I need, as an SSH client, I don't need a public or private key. I don't need to generate one. I don't even need to run an SSH daemon, right? An SSH server. I can just run an SSH client anywhere. And I can connect to Vadim's SSH server. I'll download his public key, and I will use that to jumble up the symmetric key I'd like to talk with SSH to him, send it back to him. He knows the symmetric key I'd like to use, and now we talk symmetrically from that point on. That all takes a split second, right? There's other uses for this as well, and that's kind of the cool stuff with SSH. I'll give you the PowerPoint later.
Yeah, we'll post those if you want to send them.
Yeah. There you go. I spent a lot of time making all these little arrows and colors from ripping it off other presentations I've done, right? Like we all do. But SSH Basics, basically, SSH is just encrypted telnet on the very basic level without Star Wars. No one made a Star Wars for it. But it uses symmetric crypto for all the payload data. So remember, it is 256-bit, usually AES encryption. The client negotiates the symmetric encryption. The SSH daemon, the SSH server negotiates the asymmetric stuff because that's where you're getting the public key from, right? So basically what happens is the client wants to SSH the server, so it generates that symmetric key. It says, I want an SSH session to you, but I need to send you the key I want to use. The server says, okay, starts a session, sends the public key down. You get asked yes or no. Do you want to trust this public key in your keychain? Okay. Well, that's where you get yes or no, right? Yes, I want to trust that. Because there is no third-party CA involved here. There's no digital sign of certificate. So you just trust and you say, yeah, we're good. And then you generate your symmetric key and you encrypt it with that server's public key. And you send it over there and the server now has the same key, and so you start doing symmetric encryption right at the bottom. So that's the basics of how SSH works. And what you have to remember is, if you're looking at your system, who's looked at these two files? That's the SSH config and SSHD_config. So if you look at those, the first one is obviously for the SSH client, because we almost always have an SSH command, the SSH client, and the SSH server, the SSH daemon, on the same machine.
I just want to point out there's actually two things that happen when you initiate that connection with the server, which I think need to be distinctly separated, which is one is that your computer is developing a relationship with that server and demanding it proves it is who you think it is. So if you've never connected to it before, it just blithely accepts the host key that comes off that server. If you ever talked to that server before, it says, hey, Joe, I think it's you, but only you would know the answer to
the
this
challenge,
question.
yes, yeah.
Then it says, okay, well, I have this guy who wants to log into you, and here's their information. And so there's these two stages.
So after that first session where you connect, then it's a lot more secure because it'll send a challenge. Yeah. Okay, so if you look up here for the SSH client, there's usually a commented line that's called ciphers, and if you want to use a specific cipher, uncomment that line, choose the cipher you want. Like, is it AES, cipher blockchain, or whatever? You know, for most people, it doesn't care. Most people don't care about that. It'll negotiate the strongest one usually that the server supports. The asymmetric encryption stuff is controlled by the SSH daemon. So on Balan's machine, if he's the SSH server and I don't have the SSH daemon on my machine, then in his SSHD_config, he would have the location of what we call the host keys. As soon as you install SSH, it will generate keys. You can generate them afterwards with the SSH keygen command, but when you install an SSH service, it almost always generates the keys the first time the daemon is started. And these keys can use different protocols like RSA or elliptical curve cryptography or ED, and they'll store them. They'll store them in the directory. And ED is the strongest actually, so that's usually what we typically download from the server.
What does ED stand for?
Edwards something or something. I can't remember. I googled it once. It's boring.
It's a new asymmetric.
It's yeah, it's a weird something.
It's elliptic curve cryptography, and it's called curve 25519, and that's what I know about.
Yeah, I googled it once and it was weird because it's like like a I think for some reason I seem to think it stands for Edwards something.
Yeah,
Edwards elliptical curve or something, you know. But I googled it once and it's like, okay, that's boring. Okay, I don't play nerd trivia, so. Here's the private key, and of course there'll be the same file with .pub for the public key, right? And these lines will be in your SSHD config if you want to check them out. You can comment ones out. If you don't want to use RSA, you want to only use this, you can comment these out. You don't have to use them. The other thing is every time that you connect to an SSH server, you will be asked, do you want to trust this key from the server? You know, there's no CA involved, and you say yes. Okay, why yes? First time, you never get asked again. And that, of course, puts it in the known hosts in your .ssh directory. So when you connect to a server, you don't get asked again, hey, do you want to connect, do you want to trust this key again? Because it's cached in this known host. And we're going to check that out as well. Everyone's got a .ssh directory. If you don't know the great one, it's the first time you use SSH. And they'll be in your home directory. And we'll check that out in a few seconds. But here's something really cool. This is something that I do on every single machine, have done for years, but I don't know if you guys have ever do it. Do you guys generate your own public and private keys for your user account so you don't ever have to supply a password when you log in? 1,
In the past.
2, 3 in the past. Who does it exclusively? I'm a junkie on that. I mean, I don't like typing passwords in. I like just, hey, connect to this machine. So if we go over here and we just kind of see what my setup is, I've got a terminal up here, and I'm not going to use Telnet, that's too profile. So I'm going to SSH into a VM I've got. SSH. I think the IP is 192 because I'm binding it to the wireless. There we go. 168.3.147. There we go. And if I don't put a username in, like Bob at 192, 168.3.147, it's going to see my current user, which is root. So there we go. It says, hey, first time I connected, do you want to accept this ECDSA key? I'll choose yes. And that will add it. Whoops. So I got to put my password in, right? What is my password? Okay, I'm going to try that one. Yeah, it works. So as soon as I connect successfully, it adds that key to my local .ssh directory, my home directory on the client, no hosts. I'm on the server though. So this is my client was obviously Fedora 29, as you noticed. And the server, of course, is Ubuntu 18 and looks great. I can do all sorts of fun stuff like clear the screen, type ls. Ooh, exciting, isn't it? I've got lots of files in there that we can grab with SSH as well, different ways. For example, why don't we use proposal 1? You guys want to see what's in that file? It's a text file. There we go. Scroll code pledge. What else Girl Scout? There we go. So, or proposal 2, which is Henry V's inaugural speech. Or we got some poems. So we got some sample files in here on this server. And if I exit my SSH session, I'm no longer on 147. I'm back on my local host, which is Fedora 29. And if I do a cat on .ssh known hosts, I should see what I accepted before. That is the 192.168.3.147 ECDSA. Here is my next picture. I also, earlier, went into my cloud host, cloud.trustdevelopers.com, just so that there was another entry in this file so we could see it. So that's something that, if for example, you have problems connecting to a server, clearing out that entry in this file often solves that problem. I've never had those problems, but I've heard other people say, hey, just get rid of your own notes and you're good to go. If we connect to it, we want to connect to it without a password, well, we have to generate another set of public and private keys, but this one won't be on VATM. That's the SSH server. It'll be on my SSH client for my user account, and it will store those keys inside that .ssh directory. If I want to do that, so I don't have to log into all my servers, like pretending all of your servers, I don't want to put my password on any one of you guys. I just want to SSH, your IP, I'm in. I want it to use my public key to validate me via digital signature. Send it a digital signature, a challenge, a digital signature to that challenge, and have it validate me. So the way to do that is we have to generate user keys. So I'm going to clear my screen. I'm going to type SSH keygen. And if I don't put any options, it generates keys for my user. These are not the keys that I use to negotiate my asymmetric key. Sorry, my symmetric key. So every SSH daemon, every SSH server will have to have a public and private key. Those are called host keys. They're on a host, on a server for the SSH daemon. And those are used to provide the ability for me to securely negotiate a symmetric key between the SSH client and the SSH server. These keys are just for me, for my user account, root at localhost, local domain, okay, because then choose my host name. And these user keys are only for my user account. They're in my .ssh directory after I create them, and I want to put them on every one of your servers so that I can just say, hey, SSH into that IP, and we're good to go. So I'm going to generate those. By default, it uses RSA. That's good enough. And it's going to store it in my .ssh directory, ID RSA for the private key, ID RSA.pub for the public key, and it asks you for a passphrase. This is like counterintuitive. If you put a password phrase in there, you still have to put that passphrase in every time you use your private key, and it defeats the purpose of going passwordless. So I'm just going to use no passphrase, and you should too, and it generates those keys.
There's dissension amongst the audience about that.
I know. Who uses SSH agent? Yes, I use it. I got tired of using it. It's like, okay.
So now I break into your account and I can get into everything that you can access?
No, because all the networks I use are protected. You won't be able to access the networks I use SSH on. That's where I like to put my protection. I put my faith in the network.
Not saying what works for you doesn't work for you, but for people who actually care about security.
Oh, wait. Protected networks?
But no.
Trumps LDAP? Trust me.
No, okay.
You can't touch my
there's
traffic.
polite disagreement here. But there's a couple of things that if you would like to apply a password to your keys, if you're using a Mac, the OS runs an SSH agent. Will use your login password to unlock your keychain and then extract your keys from that. So in other words, they're never stored unencrypted.
Yeah.
If you're running on Ubuntu, there is, I believe it's called a keyring app. And
You
No,
don't
that's the
want
Mac.
ever, it
Yeah.
just runs. It just runs.
Yeah. Like the
And-
agent
yeah,
just
and it runs
caches your, the
automatically.
first time you have to enter it in, it just caches it and puts it in every time you want on SSH account.
yeah, so there's ways of making this less friction.
Yeah, but
if you want to.
practical security, it probably is not going to happen, especially if you have a protected network. So I didn't choose a passphrase, and I'm good with that, and I'm not going to, lose sleep over it tonight. But on that note, who wants to use it? So I want to copy. First thing I want to do is I want to copy that key up to my Ubuntu VM. So what's the command to do that? SSH copy ID -I. That's what's the IP again? 192.168.3.147. There we go. And I didn't put a user at 192.168.3.147, so it's going to assume going to the root user there. And it says, okay, put in my password there. And I've got number of keys added 1. Great. So before I SSH'd into that, and I was prompted for my password. Now, if I SSH into that, no password. My user keys took care of the password nastiness, right? So that's like I would consider that like a basic SSH thing. I think everyone kind of dabble in that, or they may choose not to do that for security reasons, or they may choose to do it and then have a password, passphrase protecting your private key for that as well too. Or you might do what I do and regenerate your keys every week automatically and use a protected network.
Now, you're doing this as root right now, so if you were to go to a regular unprivileged user,
Same
would it
thing.
still run?
Yeah,
Is it?
I think I got a username Bob there. Hold on. Let me exit that session and clear my screen. I'm on Fedora, so if I did the same thing, let's do Bob. There we go. Installing the keys, perfect. Now I've copied up to Bob. So now if I type SSH Bob at whatever, if I type SSH Bob whatever, I don't need the keys because they're copying them up to Bob's home directory as well. And those keys are stored in Bob's home directory. So now I'm in as a regular user, as you can see at the bottom of the $ prompt. And if I do a cat on .ssh, whoops, what is it?
Authorized keys.
Yeah, let's do that. There we go. Everything, there we go. I got my SSH keys from localhost.local domain for that root user, as you can see on the right-hand side. Right? So, yeah, you can do it for regular users. It's just stored in the target server in that home directory you connect to. The cool thing about SSH is you could actually run this command and you can spell the username backwards and it will still work. Okay, come on, you guys think I'm joking? It doesn't work with just Bob. It works with other users too, like mom and dad. There you go, okay, that works. Okay, so.
You say it's symmetric.
There you go. So basically, if you want to do your user keys, you want to protect your private key with a passphrase, which is good security, apparently. You got to use like an SSH agent or something like that. And they get stored in this case because they were RSA in those files in your local machine, and you can copy them up to any other machine you want. Just specify where you want to copy them up. So I do that on all my servers. Yeah.
I gotta say it. So the one comment about protecting your private key, I would make the argument that you should. just because of lateral movement if your
That's
machine
right.
gets
You
compromised.
could pivot
right?
from one machine to the other.
And what's worse is because in your known hosts file, that's where all the hosts are listed, so they know where to go
Oh yeah.
to break out, right?
The,
So
the great thing is the machines I use. You're gonna love this one. The machine I use the most on a day-to-day basis is actually a Linux one Rockhopper. I don't know if you know what that is. It's got 84 terabytes of RAM. It's at the University of Waterloo, and you're not allowed anywhere near it because IBM still owns it. And I'm the only root user on it. And all the stuff that I connect to, all the servers I connect to, aren't actually on a network that is external to that machine. So in that case, I don't use it that much. But yes, you got a very valid point. Nobody could pivot into my machine.
Just another note to emphasize this behavior of using a public-private keys rather than username and password. A lot of people are like, oh, this is so easy, that's why I do it. You also, if you assume perfect physical security on your laptop, which I know, but if you assume that, it's actually quite a bit more secure because we really suck at picking passwords. And so your password might be something like monkey on that remote server. It's going to be a lot easier to guess, but if it's a 256 or 2048-bit random generated string, that isn't guessable full stop. So it's quite a bit.
That's the strength of like 802.1x and stuff, because you don't have a password on your Wi-Fi access point of like secret. You let the radio server randomly generate it. Real tough. I don't use secret guys. I use like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Come on, it's like my luggage. Okay, guys. So, and of course, you guys know this. I had to mention this at some point. I didn't want to leave any loopholes in case anyone here is new to SSH. And if you go to the SSH server, you notice I'm on Ubuntu, and Ubuntu 18 and like all versions of Ubuntu love to have that permit root logins equal to without password. So you'd have to copy the keys up to there if you wanted to connect as root. I always change that to yes, so that I allow root logins. I know that sounds insecure, and I'm probably going to get hammered for that one. But you never do that on a machine that you can access from the internet, of course, because then a bot could just hammer that root password that probably is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and get in. If they don't allow root logins via SSH, which is a known user, then they would have to hammer some other user account that they got some other way, right? The other thing is I do this a lot as well. Does anyone use an SSH config file to specify? So I can put like host server 1 user admin. So if every time that I SSH into server 1, I don't have to put the user. If I don't put the user, it's not going to assume my current user root. It's going to assume the user admin. But if I SSH into server 2, in this case, if I don't put a username, it's going to assume the user Bob. So if I did that for that host, which I could easily do, so it's I'm on my Fedora local host there, vi.ssh config. What could I put in there? Well, I could put like a host name. There we go. 192.168.3.147. User Bob. So I'll just put 1 in there. I could have as many as I want. Boom. And now when I SSH into 192.168.3.147, I put no Bob at, and I'm logged in as root, so it should automatically connect as root, right? But no, it's going to connect as Bob because of that little config file. Right, so I see a $sign there. I didn't have to put Bob because my config file says anytime you connect to that machine, just log in as user Bob, right? So there's other things you can put in that file too, but that's what I've used it for. I'm going to exit out of there. Clear my screen. Some other neat things is copying files. You can do it the Unix foo way, where you're using redirection. So you can say, hey, SSH, connect to server 1 as the root user, and cat this file, and save it to your local machine as, var sample. Right? Or you could use the SCP command to do that too in a much easier way, where it has a source and destination. The source would be root, connect root at server 1 with SSH, and here's the path of the file, and copy to var. But I like the first way a little bit more. The only thing that's different is if you're going to do it the opposite, if you're going to copy a file up to the server, then you know, you have to use this kind of syntax, and you have to protect the output redirection symbol from your local shell, because the SSH command has to see that instead of your local shell interpreting it, right? So it doesn't save the output of that command to Varlala.
This is even more awesome than you're making it out to be. Because if you should be some silly person like me who has a database server you need to back up on a remote server, you can actually make that SSH root at some server MySQL dump and have it burp it out to standard output. I think I had to send to the cat or something, but I got standard output. Pipe to gzip, and send it over the SSH connection, then a local machine, pipe it to gzip, decompress, and MySQL restore and load it.
Oh, yeah.
Across the SSH connection.
Yeah.
Just make sure you get the ends in the right direction or you're dead.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But it is amazing.
I've used it to image files. I use it primarily to image file systems on protecting the machine. We have a machine where the data is encrypted on all the partitions, and so we can't read it, but we can move it. And so things like, you know, using DD, like input file is root lala. Well, that might not be root lala. That might be dev nvme 0n1p1 or something, right? Some disk device, or dev SDA, or more likely dev SDB. Image dev SDB to output file dev SDD on the other machine, and it images the entire encrypted partition over to the other machine. Right? We do that on a micro level with a lot of our containers on that Rockhopper.
But does it take any compression in the stream?
No.
It can. It depends on. It's
If
another thing that's
there's an option
config.
for it, but it's not turned on by default.
No.
This alone does not do that, right? It just does what you're telling it to do. You can compress SSH payloads, but that's everything in SSH will be compressed, right? So you can turn that on in the SSH gaming config file.
That's what I was
Yes. You can also turn on the SSH client config file too, and it will request it from the daemon. I've never done that.
Is that the minus C there? Is it the minus capital C compression?
So yeah, that capital C. So basically, we're just you're running that command, right? User at host dd output file var loa. So it's basically imaging this file to that file. But you could use it for anything. Like you want to take the output from TTY5 and send the TTY to another machine, start typing on TTY5 and the other person sees it. Or back in the day before we had ELSA, you guys remember ELSA for sound? You could take the dev DSP. You could pipe the microphone on your machine to the speakers on another machine. You could freak out other users. Remember that? You know, you could do all sorts of fun stuff with this, right? I do it all the time. In fact, you know, if you want to get that Girl Scout pledge, you could, you know, open that up real quick. It is not hard. If you know, we go over there, it would just be want to download it. Root at 192.168.3.147 cat root proposal 1, which is the Girl Scout pledge. Save it to var proposal 1 or var sample or something like that, and we'd download it. We'd have it. It'd be real quick and it'd be encrypted. But there's another way that I like to do when it's not imaging a whole file system with DD. There's a much better, cool way. Does anyone here use SSHFS? 2, 3, 4? I love that thing. I love it. I use it all the time. I mean, I don't even use NFS anymore. Why use NFS? It's like SSHFS. Way cool. Full of cool kids are using it. So we'll get to that in a few minutes, but before I get to that part, that's the end. Tunneling is kind of common. I use this all the time. Does anyone else use SSH tunneling? It's kind of weird. If you want to add SSH cryptography, there's two camps for cryptography, right? There's the SSL TLS stuff, which can work with any technology. You can add it to it. Bit of a pain in the butt when it comes to certificates. And then there's the SSH stream, like, you know, the difference between secure FTP versus FTPS, right? Secure FTP is SSH FTP. FTPS is FTP plus SSL TLS. You know, there's two different approaches that way. I prefer the SSH approach most of the time, just because I find it faster and I like SSH. But everyone here has probably tunneled X commands. If you tunnel X commands, probably not to a server. That's why you know, if you're doing it from workstation to workstation, you want to run a quick utility on a Linux workstation. Like maybe you work for NavBlue or Christie Digital, where they have a lot of Linux workstations. or SAP, and you're an admin and you want to go in there to a Linux workstation running SUSE, you could just like SSH-X tunnel all the XORG stuff through. You just have to make sure that other machine has XOF, right? XOF is enabled on workstations by default, but not often on servers. So you might have to enable that on your server if you're going to do it to a server, and you could run something like Control Center. I don't have a GUI on my Ubuntu VM, so I'm not going to try that one out. But tunneling other stuff, like VNC I use quite a bit for managing other things, and I always like to encrypt with SSH. So the way this works is a little weird. If you use local tunneling, basically you're saying, go to yourself, like localhost, on port 5999, forget this, go to yourself on port 5999, and we'll forward it to port 5900 on this machine, which also knows itself as localhost. So everything here is actually the target. I know it sounds weird. That's the way it works. And 5900, of course, is the default port for VNC. So if I just go localhost 5999, I'm suddenly on 5900 as Bob on that server, and I see Bob's beautiful desktop. Okay. So the other commands can spell it backwards and still work. So you just have to, connect to your whatever your VNC client is and go to localhost 5999, and that starts an SSH tunnel to the other VNC service on port 5900. The tunnel is started, is initiated here, so you have to keep this open, right? This has to stay open. If you close this, then you can't do this. As soon as you close this, you cancel this. But the tunnel isn't activated. It actually doesn't do the authentication until you actually send data across it, which is kind of nice. The other thing is remote tunneling. This is kind of weird. It's the opposite. Basically, say for example, you got your machine's called server 1, and you got a VNC server listening on port 5900. Well, you can make that local VNC server available across an SSH tunnel to the machine client 1 as the user Bob, and all Bob has to do is connect to his own machine, localhost on port 5999, and he'll be going across that SSH tunnel to your machine on port 5900. Clear as mud, right? Yeah, once you do it a couple times, you forget about it. But that's a weird way to do it. Most of the time, it's just local port 40. But both of these are supported in SSH. The way I use it a lot is to get around firewalls. Anyone like to test the limits of their company's firewall? No? Yes. You just have to know the network events. If they're kind of overworked, yeah, you got a heyday. You want to get to Reddit, you want to get to anywhere else, you can get around that firewall, no problem.
Just send them a couple trace routes with bug reports, and then you can get anything else you want out of them.
There we go. Yeah, you socially engineer them. That's right. Yeah. Or if you don't like them and you just, go to the default passwords that's online, they probably didn't change the default password for the next-gen firewall. There you go, it's yours now. So if you look at this, guys, here's something. So you see you're at work and you have a server running at home with SSH daemon, right? And you can get to that server through your company's firewall because it usually allows SSH, right? If you can SSH into your home server, as any user, doesn't matter what user, you can do local port forwarding. You could say, hey, if your firewall is blocking access to lala.com on port 443, you can still get there. You're just going through an SSH tunnel to your home server and then going out to lala.com. Do you guys want to try this out? Maybe with Google or something?
Ports need privileged accounts.
What's that?
Privileged ports like 443 and 80 need privileged accounts at the destination.
So who?
So if you can't just go to Bob at home server, it has to be an account that can redirect a privileged port.
Yes. So in this case, if I'm doing this as root, it will be root. But you can do another user just as long as you have those rights.
The previous talk talked about LXC. So yes, you're right, but it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to test this, you could just run an LXD container.
Yeah. So if, say for example, if you guys want to, does anyone want to see this work?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Okay, so what we could do is we could, you know, do some funky tunneling here. And we've got our command prompt here, and I'm going to just buy FT hosts. And, you know, actually I didn't even just buy it. Let's put it out of there. That's just cat FT hosts. You guys know what that file is, right? And on Fedora, oh my gosh, they have so many names. But you can see the first line wraps around 127.01, the IP version 4 is called localhost, localhost.local domain, localhost 4, localhost 4. Local domain 4, and also google.ca. So, if I try to curl https google.ca, failed to connect because it's trying to go to a web server on me, and I don't have a web server running on my local host. Connection refused. How could I fix that? What's something I could do to fix that? I could maybe say, if I go to you know, google.ca, my local machine, I want everything to kind of go to through my VM, that 147. Yeah, so what would I do?
The minus capital D parameter on this.
I've never used it.
So SOX proxy.
Oh, the SOX proxy. Oh, yeah, that's my next slide. Darn it.
Sorry.
Yeah. What the heck? It's one capital D. So there, that's what we're doing, guys. Going across the firewall, and then there's the SOX proxy. So that's if you want to like tell Firefox or something to or to go to localhost on port 8080. You could just say, okay, anytime you get a request on port 8080, let's do a SOX 5 proxy. It does SOX 4 and SOX 5 to your home server. So you could do all the traffic through a web browser to your home server. Yeah, I wasn't thinking straight.
So wait, so I'm confused in a few ways. Can you go back to the previous slide where we have the nice picture?
Yeah. Yeah, this picture I did not do. I ripped it off the internet.
Yeah. So computer A is behind your firewall. Computer B is the one that you're.
That's your home server. Okay.
Okay. Now how does computer B know to look to Google?
Ah, Google is computer C. That's where we want to go, right? We want to get to computer C. We can't get through our firewall from computer A, that's your machine in the company, through the firewall to google.ca because the firewall is going to say, ah, we're not letting you to Google. But we will let you to your home server, which will then forward you to Google.
DNS.
Yeah.
That one's got, computer B has real DNS as opposed to the fudged one.
That's
on
right.
Computer A.
Yeah. The other, and this is why I like this type of forwarding, because if we go to the, here, go ahead, Ben. Are you good?
I'm going to ask the question.
Okay. If I go over here, the only problem with doing the SOX proxy, this is the way this is the reason I don't like this one as much, is if you do a SOX proxy, it works fine, but you're not using your home server to do the name resolution. There's a way you can add like DNS script or something to tunnel the DNS requests through the SOX proxy, but the DNS lookups are still happening from your machine inside the company, which your firewall could prevent. Right?
There's actually an option in Firefox where you can tell it to proxy the DNS.
Is there really?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not surprised. There you go.
So, do you have to have an open SSH connection to it? Is it possible to authenticate on the same line when you were reaching out to bypass your firewall?
I'm not sure you.
Well, I mean, when you're using an example just to go to google.ca,
Okay.
what, you went back to your virtual machine and you closed it, or you shut it down, or you just closed the
I just
SSH
closed my
session?
SSH session.
So you need an active SSH
So
session.
yeah, you got to have that active SSH session. So as soon as I close that SSH tunnel with a capital L, then my tunneling goes away. So you got to keep that SSH session open to get by your firewall, which is fine. You just open up another shell, right? Open up whatever you want. The other thing is that there's problems with that. Sometimes the forwarding options or the XL, if you can't forward X stuff like the capital X, X1140 might be off inside your daemon config file, or TCP/IP forwarding, which is what we're using, might be turned off as well, right? So just check those options, right?
I think there's a dash
Usually
thing
not.
around where we'll push it all into the background so you don't have to keep the session running.
Yeah, you could just do it in the background, I guess, or
Just in the background. Also, you can also set up your home server to listen on another port. So that instead of, if you're restricted on port 8080, for example, or port 22 in SSH, you can SSH -B to get to your port 80 server, SSH server.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good thing too.
So, I'm the main sysadmin and I don't want you seeing Google. So what do I see as the main sysadmin when you're trying to do this? I see that you're making an SSH connection over port 22 to home server?
Yes. You can't see the traffic because it's encrypted, but you can limit those sessions if you want to. That would be kind of evil, but you could. But probably the better way to do is to like throw a box like Alien Vault Seam or something on the network, where you can kind of more granularly see what people are doing and then make decisions. If someone has but here's my, like as an admin, I would say, you know what, if someone's got, you know, the technical gumption to do this, why, you know, do the cat and mouse game? They're going to find another way. You know, let them do it. Good. They're doing it for a protected session. We're kind of like, we're not really that responsible for that kind of traffic because we can't see it as an organization, right? So legally, if they're browsing porn or something, you know, we don't get dinged.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but a scenario where evil would be correct.
Okay.
And that makes me seem very corporate.
I like evil.
Say you've got a factory and it's got known workflows, ebbs and flows.
Okay.
Any other network activity you permit is a liability. It can threaten production, it could threaten health and safety and these sorts of things. So if you have a whitelist network, say at a nuclear reactor, where only whitelisted connections are permitted.
I'm pretty sure a nuclear reactor is not going to let you go to your home server.
Yes, yes. So I'm just saying it's not automatically.
Yeah, it depends on your environment, I guess, right? You know, like.
But retail is another example. It's where it's not like life and safety, but like a business's health, like Target has discovered. You know, they should have just whitelisted the connections. Hey, this person's allowed to connect to the air conditioner. That's it. Air conditioner shouldn't be asking our financials for
Yeah,
information.
and of course, yeah, I guess that's more of a big concern now because everyone's worried about IoT security and someone, you know, all the devices now that have IP addresses, IP version 6 addresses in the net, so technically if your toaster has an IP version 6 address, someone could hack it and burn your toast or something. But yeah, I don't worry too much about that. I like
You
security.
have to find the IPv6 address.
Yeah, I know,
That's the trickier bit.
Well,
If
isn't
they can
IP
figure
version
out
6
the MAC
just going to
address,
be
they
for like
probably
IoT and then IP version 4 for us? I think that's kind of like, it's a kind of a failed thing, right? We've been trying for 20 years to move to IP version 6. It's just not for humans that well. But this is my favorite part. I use this all the time. Well, I use all the stuff we talked about, except I don't use the SOX proxy. And when I copy files, I typically don't use SCP. I actually use redirection. I use piping. I use that too. But this is phenomenal. Now, if you install SSHFS, it's a fuse package. I could connect to like root at server 1, to the root file system on root at server 1 and mount it locally to MNT. So when I go to MNT, I'm going to the root file system on server 1 as root, right? And the great thing is it's just like an NFS mount. So if you wanted to, you could technically do an ARM-RF and it would work without the no preserve root. You can bypass that, right? You guys know what the capital R is, right? The resume option.
Yeah.
There's no undelete. Thank you to the inode table. All right, so if we check this out, you know, well, we could easily do that if we wanted to. Whoops. So key thing here is if you connect as a regular user, you got to be careful where you're mounting stuff to and what you're looking at. You're going to get lots of weird stuff. So I always do this as root. I haven't got a lot of, you know, experience with not using this as root. It's a very administrative thing for me. So it may not work that well as a regular user. But it's pretty simple. It's got like NFS syntax almost. All we have to do is SSHFS. Yeah, and there's nothing required on the server. Nothing. You don't have to install squat because this is just SSH. You got an SSH daemon. All this is a fancy client that treats it like NFS. So, you know, root, I'm going to have to put root because I think the default user is Bob now for my config file. So root at 192.168, 3.147, the root file system that's mounted to, I don't know, MNT, just like the slide. There we go. Boom. I didn't have to provide a password because I used my user keys that are very insecure apparently. So if I do an LS on MNT, beauty. That's the root of my Ubuntu server. Anyone want me to do an RM-capital? Because, hey, it's not the root. So no preserved word actually works.
How fast does something like find run?
Well, no, you could make a shell script.
Well, no, I'm saying if you CD to /mount and go find sbin, how fast is it going to find all the files on sbin on the other?
So find everything under sbin?
Yeah, sure.
There we go. Oh. Starting from MNTS.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? We should have done it. We didn't have to go into the directory. Dash name, you know, star.
Yeah, so okay, that's pretty snappy.
It's as fast, if not faster than NFS in my experience, and I copied a lot of stuff.
The one catch is if you're sitting with a high latency link, the find is running in your local machine, so you have the network latency.
Yeah, that would suck.
So if you go ahead and do it the other way around, you do SSH space find blah, and then process it in the output.
The cool thing about it though, and if I do a quick DF, you'll see that it's just, oops. Let's do a quick mount, pipe it to tail-1, there we go. You'll notice that it's just, you know, it's using the fuse driver, right? Fuse.
Yeah. What is that?
It's never been flaky for me at all. It's actually pretty cool. The other thing that you could do technically, like if you're mounting other systems, the root file system on other servers, on your server, well then you could write like a shell script. It could be triggered by something like a web front end, and the shell script could be called if I get fired. And there you go, you just loop it through with a for loop on all your machines and RM-capital. Just make sure you don't do backups like I don't do.
You want to watch out for file permission, because you're logged into that other system that uses file permission. There are a couple of switches to reassign file permission.
Yes, so like there's no root squash options for this, obviously. If you're root, which is what I like, and that's why I've never tried it as the regular users, because you know you're in as the regular users and you're limited to what you use.
Yeah, if you're connecting, if you're SSHFS mounting the remote file system Bob at whatever, then you're limited to Bob's permissions on the other side.
Yeah. And it's not, you gotta not treat it like NFS, because NFS has, well, NFS calls the area of the Linux file subsystem that mounts things, and not every user is allowed to do that, you know, like mounting USB devices and stuff like that. That's where we have to write UDEV rules and crap like that. Well, this is totally different. This is like an SSH client. There are no rules that way, right? You're basically using a big SSH client. You're just fusing it with your system.
And the other problem is that file ownerships all translate to the user ID number. So on my server, I'm user 1000 as Bob. You might be user 1000 as Jason.
Yep.
If you log into my system, all my files shows up as Jason.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So if your users aren't coordinated across the system, you know, I could be looking at files. But here's the thing: I'm in an SSH client, right? So when I do a long listing of anything in that directory, I'm on the target machine. I'm not on my machine. But if I copy a file, you know, I'm copying a file from one directory to another. I'm actually doing that SSH command in the background, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue.
The problem is when you're mounting on an existing directory structure in your home system already, suddenly the file permission, the file ownerships change in a particular branch of the system. And there's another switch on SSHFS to remap the user.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Yeah. No, never gone that far because I only do it as root, right? So.
Makes so much easier.
Yeah. I mean, I stay as root too. I don't even practice the Japanese art of sudo.
If your server's running something like, let's say, like ZFS or some other file system that you may not have installed.
Well, it's irrelevant to the file.
It's irrelevant.
Right? It's like the vnode table will handle all that, right? So I use ZFS actually almost exclusively for XFS and ZFS for me. But
your client doesn't need anything. Like it doesn't need anything special.
No,
it's resolved on the server.
Yeah, the vnode table and the file system will handle all that. You know, so.
Do you know how it handles, like if the connection is interrupted while you're in the middle of a process, if it's able to detect it or gracefully end the operation? Like, let's
I've
say,
never actually had that. I've never done it across a flaky connection.
but like, would you be able to have the client or the server realize that the connection's flaky?
Well, SSH kind of does that. Like, it disconnected.
There's a program called Shuttle, SSH Shuttle, which deals with really slow, flaky, intermittent disconnections.
Wow.
SSH Shuttle.
So is that like? So it's just something that you download, like a helper process kind of thing that just runs as a
I don't
daemon?
know
Or?
exactly how it works. I think it uses SSH, but just keeps on reattempting the connection. So if you've got a really bad connection, slow, laggy, or intermittent, S-Shuttle will take you and make it.
That's pretty awesome, actually.
And that's on the server end or on the client end?
It's on the client. I don't know if you need.
So it's just like automatic
server to-
reconnects, right?
So shuttle is, you shuttle into something instead of SSH into something.
So it's like an
I'm not sure
alternate
if it's
station.
anything on its receiving end. I don't think so.
Probably just reconnects. That's pretty cool. I usually just go home with it. Screw this. Get a copy of it. Anyone else? This is the last part of my SSH. Most of you knew part or most or all of all this stuff, but I hope that some of you kind of learned one thing, maybe two, or just enjoyed my presentation or the graphics I put together. Some other presentation. Yeah. On SSH. It's kind of a weird topic. I thought, this would be like the advanced topic, but it's not really an advanced topic. SSH. The tricky stuff with SSH is just the tunneling thing, I think. But once you do that a few times and have a purpose to do it, it's very easy. Copying files, typing things, imaging file systems with DVD across SSH, we do that all the time, and SSHFS all the time. You get addicted to it. I haven't used NFS on most machines in the last year, actually, because I've always found other ways to do it, and part of those ways involved SSH. And I don't want to deal with NFS anymore.
Have you ever used agent forwarding?
SSH agent forwarding? No, what is that about?
This is awesome sauce. So it's a very particular problem that most people don't have. But
Okay.
say you're somewhere and you want to go somewhere else. You want to go to another site because your computer can't connect to what you want to. Say it's a network switch or something like that. You can't connect to it directly. But your computer in the office can connect to the network switch. So normally how we do this is we'd SSH into the office to whatever computer we can get into, and we pivot, we turn around, and we'd SSH into the switch. But what if you're using your personal keys, right? You don't want to type your password in there. Or what if you're using keys and you don't want to put your private key on that office computer? You want it to be on your laptop, on your administrative station, and nowhere else in the world. But you want to be able to use it everywhere in the world, no matter where you are, on your machine or on other machines. So when you run an SSH agent, which interacts with on your local machine, that kind of handles this public-private key. So you make connection, the agent kind of goes ahead and injects itself into it. It's part of the protocol. So the SSH client says, oh, hey, I've got this authentication thing. I'm going to send it up to the agent to do the hard work and then send back the result. But when you're connecting to the second hop, you can add, for your initial SSH connection, you can put in a dash, I think it's a lowercase a, uppercase a. And what happens is that remote server is told, hey, there's an SSH agent, send it over the tunnel back to the guy who connected to you if you have any authentication questions. And so when you connect to that third server, the server sends it to the second server. And so the switch sends it to your work machine. That work machine says, no, I'm not going to handle this. I'm going to forward it back to your laptop, which is connecting to me. And your laptop does the authentication.
So it's
result,
transitive trust, basically.
You never have to put your private key anywhere else. You can actually go 6 hops down the road, and your private key never leaves your machine, but you get access to its functionality and power everywhere you go.
So
That's pretty cool.
Machine that has none of your keys on.
No, all it does is forward the authentication request back up the stream until it gets to an agent. And so every time you put a -A, it adds another link to that chain.
In that case, if you wanted to do more than one hop, is that all in the original line, or does each machine need an agent configuration inside of it?
No, it's the original agent. So every time you have a -A, you're deferring upstream one layer. So kind of like a bucket brigade, right? Where
You
it's
can
passing
provide an
back and
SSH
forth.
command as the parameter to an SSH command to make your multiple hops.
Oh, yeah. So like SSH, blah, quote, SSH,
Yeah.
foo, quote,
Well,
date.
Well, we have,
Define the
I-
date on your server's server.
then you gotta take your quotes.
Well, if you do the command line right, each one will parse its own parameters. Unless something at the bottom needs quoting, you don't have to quote it the rest of the way up. You can go SSH foo, SSH foo 2, SSH Joet foo 3,
But that's not
and get,
totally, I can't read that.
it's a command line. It's
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought of that.
Because it doesn't have to go as a word across, which is quoting would do.
We're gonna go to hell for
See,
this.
this is why I don't use SSH agent, guys. I don't put a passphrase on my private key. I'm good. All right, guys. So this is the end of my press. That's the end. These are quick,
Actually, for SSH/FS, there's probably a Windows client as well.
Yeah, there probably is.
SSH/FS.
Yeah.
Open source.
All right, so thank you very much, Jason.
You're welcome.
If someone wants a presentation idea, Fuse, which is the file system user
Yes.
something. So it's file systems in Linux user space instead of being in the kernel, which was, as Jason was saying, the reason you don't need fancy root permissions to mount it the way you do NFS. If someone wanted to do a presentation on Fuse, that would be cool.
There's a lot of things.
Yes. NFS and Fuse at this point. Anyway, so that's it. Thanks you all for coming.
Oh, yeah, there is one.
Drinking some food.
That'll be
We'll be
a
heading over to the
Starbucks.
tannery. Hazel on tannery.
There's